Os, welcome back to The Singing Samurai. Today's video deals with affective neuroscience, specifically the affective neuroscience of rough and tumble play, and what rough and tumble play tells us about the beneficial relationship between Yoshokai Aikido and the vocal studio. If you want to find out how these things are connected, stick around. Okay, I'm really excited about this topic, especially because I find it to be absolutely fascinating. There were things about looking into rough and tumble play that really stunned me, specifically about how rats actually interact in the world and amongst other rats. We'll get into that in a second, but before we dive into the specifics, I wanted to offer a brief definition of what affective neuroscience is for those who don't know, and then also specifically what rough and tumble play is. From the NOBA project, affective neuroscience examines how the brain creates emotional responses. Emotions are psychological phenomena that involve changes to the body, like facial expressions, changes in autonomic nervous system activity, feeling states, subjective responses, and urges to act in specific ways, or motivations. Affective neuroscience aims to understand how matter, brain structures and chemicals, creates one of the most fascinating aspects of the mind, the emotions. Affective neuroscience uses unbiased, observable measures that provide credible evidence to other sciences and laypersons on the importance of emotions. It also leads to biologically based treatments for affective disorders like depression. Cool. So I guess in a nutshell, it's a way of saying affective neuroscience uses measurable experiments to study how the brain produces emotional responses. We can study an emotional response from the aspect of psychiatry, the chemicals of the brain. We can study it from the aspects of psychology, trained psychotherapists to try and get to the bottom of why somebody's doing something. This is something rather different than psychology or psychiatry. Maybe it's kind of like a merging of the two and a bunch of other disciplines as well. But it's dealing with, watching observed behavior and then trying to come up with ways to test that observed behavior and say, is this causing this, or is this causing that, and what have you. And so one of the aspects of affective neuroscience that I found to be really helpful in my understanding of how Aikido is a beneficial study for singing is in rough and tumble play. Now, rough and tumble play is a subject that was studied intensively by Dr. Yoshokai Aikido. I think he may have even coined the term. Among many different types of observations that Dr. Aikido created, one that I found to be particularly helpful was a test where he would attach a rat to an apparatus and how strongly they would pull towards a direction indicated how much they really wanted to do a given thing. And the thing that rats, especially adolescent male rats, pulled the hardest on was the opportunity to go and wrestle with another rat, usually a rat that's a bit bigger and a bit older. And this response was greater than that of cocaine or sugar or a whole host of other things. It was like the most important thing that they wanted to do, even beyond something that would be like a brain altering chemical. That's like really fascinating. Why would a young rat want to wrestle that badly? But when you start to kind of peel apart the layers and what that wrestling provides that young rat, it starts to make sense. So one of the most fascinating aspects of young rats wrestling that Dr. Aikido was able to observe was that they understood the concepts of fair play and the set of all potential future games. That's pretty fascinating. And so he discovered this because a larger rat, say only 10% bigger, will win every single wrestling match if they want to when they're presented with a smaller rat to wrestle with. However, it was noted that about 30% of the time, bigger rats would intentionally lose to the smaller rats. And the reason for this was that if the bigger rats always won, then the smaller rats would decide to not wrestle with them anymore, thus eliminating the fun for both. And so the bigger rat was like, well, if I want to keep playing, if I want to keep in being involved in the set of all potential future wrestling matches. I gotta let this little guy win a couple of times. And so that's really fascinating. And so there's that. And then there's another aspect of this, another benefit that I really didn't expect, and that there are greater cognitive benefits for adolescent rats that get to participate in rough and tumble play, meaning that they are smarter, they are able to process information faster, their memory is better, things of this nature, if they get to participate in rough and tumble play. So there's a darker side to this too, and it relates to human beings in a pretty surprising way. But say you take a adolescent rat and you raise it in isolation. It's never been introduced to other rats, and rats are highly social creatures. They want to live in a group. If you take that adolescent rat and you put it into a cage full of other rats, it will constantly try and find the biggest rat, the most dominant rat, and fight it 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 violently until either it has killed the bigger rat or the bigger rat kills it. As compared to an adolescent rat that did get to be raised amongst the group and got to participate in rough and tumble play in a positive way, they never do that. They will find their order in society, and they will fit into it peaceably with the other rats. And so that's really, really fascinating. Why I say that there's a darker side to this is that it's the same for human beings, especially young men, young boys, especially around the age of, like, it starts around 4 or 5 or so, all the way up on through. Their ability to participate in rough and tumble play is really, really important. If they don't, then there's a greater chance that they won't be able to control aggression and stop themselves from being very violent, just like that young rat raised in isolation. And then this correlates to a higher rate of criminality in their adult life. But also, because of that cognitive benefit, if a young human boy doesn't get to participate in rough and tumble play, they will also lack the cognitive benefits that they could have received by participating in rough and tumble play all the way through their life. So there are a couple of aspects of rough and tumble play that need to be there for it to function. And after I explain that, I'll explain how Aikido provides that atmosphere and that environment for rough and tumble play. So one of the things that needs to be there is the exception that you're not actually trying to hurt each other. So when rats wrestle, they're really vigorous, and it looks like they're really fighting, but they're not. They're just having a lot of fun. And it's the same way you think about it, like maybe a dad with their kids wrestling on the couch, or creating a couch fort or whatever, and just tossing everyone back and forth on the bed and having a really good time. And the kids just go full force at dad because dad's kind of indestructible, but they also learn, like, oh, I can't really pull hair, I shouldn't bite, or I shouldn't poke eyes, things like that. They learn through being aggressive how to deal with those aggressive feelings and how to recognize boundaries in the same way that rats do. And so in order to have that, you need to have a good positive relationship with parent and child. And usually it's the father. It doesn't have to be, it can be mom too, but usually it's the dad. And that's partially because of the second thing that's required. The person that you're wrestling with has to be able to hurt you. Like, you have to understand, this person could hurt me if they want to, but they're not. They're working with me, they're wrestling with me, they're playing with me, but they have the capacity to hurt me, which allows us to have this ability to kind of test those boundaries and say, I can test this safely. I can maybe go too far with this person. I'm not going to hurt them. And I can also trust that they won't hurt me. And in doing that, it touches on a whole lot of different areas of the brain in a pretty fantastic and incredible way. Emotional regulation certainly being up there, and the ability to regulate our aggressive tendencies, but then also, just like the rats, the cognitive ability. Children who participate in rough and tumble play, especially with a father figure or an adult that they trust that's not going to hurt them but can hurt them, it produces these really wonderful effects. Let's talk about briefly how Yoshokai Aikido creates this environment for children and young adults, and then how that's beneficial in the studio. So one of the aspects that I deal with as a teacher all the time is emotional regulation. Not only that, but just the ability to express our emotions more clearly. And I found that with students that have really great emotional regulation, they have the skills necessary to kind of control their emotional responses to a lot of stressful situations, the better that they do in lessons, but the better that they do as well at expressing those emotions that they need to for the given piece of music really effectively. It allows them to more confidently access their emotions because they have a greater control over their emotions. For younger kids that don't have a lot of control over their emotions, they can blurt things out or do things that can make them feel really embarrassed. And so because they feel that vulnerability, they have they're less apt to really express themselves fully. But then also because the cognitive benefits. If you have students who actively participate in something like rough and tumble play, and it's slowly but surely building their cognitive ability, well, then students that come to lessons are going to have a much easier time tackling all of the different subjects that we require them to think about. From memorization to learning your notes and rhythms to processing new information about techniques or processing new information about character backgrounds or whatever, staging, how we move, all of these different things. We're asking students to juggle so many balls in the air. And the one thing that's going to make that easier for them is to have a higher cognitive ability. Okay, so there's some good news and some bad news about this benefit, cognitively speaking. I reached out to another scientist named Dr. Sergio Pellis. He's in Canada. He actually knew Dr. Yoshokai really well. And they worked together, I think, on a number of subjects, and he sent me some of the articles that he's written about this subject. And I asked him, I said, well, can adults gain this benefit cognitively if they participate in rough and tumble play? And he said, no, they can't, not according to the available data, that it basically, the prime time is in adolescence from 10 to 17 or in there. After about 17 or 18 years, the cognitive benefits drop off in terms of the potential. The greater potential cognitive benefits, they kind of stop at that point. However, whatever benefits have been realized through rough and tumble play, or just whatever cognitive abilities that we've developed over the course of our childhood up into adults, can be sharpened and kind of at their highest possible state if adults continue to participate in rough and tumble play. So even if you didn't get a really great, life leading up to that in terms of rough and tumble play and these cognitive benefits, what benefits you did receive from whatever you did have as a kid, you can keep sharp and keep realized to the best of their ability by participating in rough and tumble play as an adult. The nature of Yoshokai Aikido is steeped in etiquette, and some bits of etiquette are incredibly beneficial to students training, especially beginning students. When we line up in class, we line up for the most junior person all the way up to the most senior person. And then when we get onto the mat to train, the most senior person snakes around to face the most junior person. So the partner that you have, if you're the most beginning person in the classroom, is going to be the most experienced student in the classroom, or possibly the instructor that day, depending on the circumstances. And so that means that you have somebody that you can trust to teach you these techniques, somebody who could absolutely 100% hurt you, especially as a beginner. You don't know anything. And that you're going to follow these rules that have been created by Yoshokai Aikido to ensure fairness, and that the focus is not on winning or losing, but the focus is on how we train with our partner. On top of that, the unique relationship between shite and uke presents a lot of different opportunities to practice just that. So as I've said in other videos, uke is the receiver of technique, shite is the deliverer of technique. Uke seems like the one losing to the outside eye, and shite seems like the one winning to the outside eye. But uke is studying this side to help shite, and shite is studying this side to help uke, and that's a really unique and interesting relationship when it comes to the world of combat studies and martial arts. And in this situation where you're training with somebody who is much higher rank than you, when they're studying how to lose, they still have the capacity to kind of turn that back around if they really wanted to, especially if you kind of broke the rules and you're trying to hurt them. And then as stay, they're not going to hurt you even though that they can. They'll take you right to that limit, which is what's appropriate, but they won't hurt you. And through that study and through trial and error and learning to correct mistakes and so on and so forth, and in effect, kind of, it's not wrestling in the sense of it's not super competitive, like maybe wrestling or jiu-jitsu or judo or what have you. Aikido is a cooperative study, but the elements are still there. And I would say that they're there on a greater level because cooperation is key as compared to competitive nature. And the aspects of rough and tumble play that are the most important are those cooperative aspects as compared to the competitive ones. Again, if the bigger rat wins all the time, then the younger rat doesn't want to participate. I think lastly, something that's really fascinating about this for the studio, and it's a way to teach our students in terms of their behavior, why it's so important to get along with their peers, that it's not about winning, all the time. It's about being invited back to the table or being invited back to the stage. When we have a diva, as an example, and they're constantly causing problems for everyone because they want to be the star of the show, they want to win, it's very likely that they didn't get the opportunity to really regulate those emotions when they were a lot younger. And because of their attitude, because it's so toxic and so destructive, and it causes so many problems, oftentimes they don't get hired back. And that's in the professional world. That goes all the way back to high school, middle school. If you're a pain in the butt for everyone, they don't want to deal with you. If you're the most talented person, if you're the best singer, there's always an exception to the rule. But if you're not, and as you keep going up higher and higher, the difference between the best and the worst becomes less and less. If you give them a reason to say no to you, they will. And the people that make those decisions on who to cast are not fair. And so we should never give them a reason to say no. And if they need just one reason, that person, I think they're a diva, then you're out. And so understanding these benefits, the cognitive benefits, the social emotional benefits, are paramount just in terms of the demand that we put on our students in the studio, but also as a way of helping our students regulate out those tendencies to be a diva or to be egotistical without them realizing it from the affective neuroscience perspective is super cool. All right, so I'm going to talk about these things and make longer videos in the future, but that's just an introduction as short as I can make it. So as far as we've gotten in the series, we've got the reward system of the brain, we've got vestibular stimulation, and now we have affective neuroscience and rough and tumble play. That's three really important and key benefits to training in Yoshokai Aikido as a supplemental study for the studio. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Thank you very much. Os!